it is 8:30.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Good morning.
Shalom.
And so fabulous to be with you, Michelle and Dan. And so fabulous to be with all of you. Our beloved friend Elias is on vacation this weekend. He's going to Buenos Aires tomorrow to see his beloved mother. And we should be expecting Eliza soon.
And it's his birthday today.
And it's his birthday, and Eliza is here. So we are going to wish Elias a happy birthday, and we are going to thank God for the gift of learning Torah together. Page 63. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. V'harevna Adonai Eloheinu et divrei Toratcha b'finu ובפי עמך בית ישראל, נהיה אנחנו וצאצאינו וצאצאי עמך בית ישראל, כולנו יודעי שמך ולומדי תורתך לשמה, ברוך אתה אדוני המלמד תורה לעמו ישראל, ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, אשר בחר בנו מכל העמים ונתן לנו את תורתו, Baruch atah Adonai Torah. So Shabbat Shalom, everyone, and so excited for this class. As we all know, the big event to think about and to process this week on its own, and then to see what fruitful comparisons there are with the Jewish tradition, is the inauguration. And it feels like Amanda Gorman stole the show. It feels like the youngest inaugural poet of our country just received rave reviews. There were a lot of aspects of the day that were wonderful that were reported on, but Amanda Gorman's reading of The Hill That We Climb just seemed to sparkle and shine. And I want to talk about that for a moment because she had actually a pretty tough assignment, not only being 23, 24 years old and standing before the entire nation. That's already very scary. I'm 59 and I give a sermon to an empty sanctuary, and it freaks me out every Saturday, and I've been doing it for 24 years. But here she is speaking to literally the nation and literally to the world. So just in and of itself, oh my God, Amanda Gorman, how did you do that? You're 23 years old, 24 years old. But beyond that, her job was really hard because the obvious context, that exactly where she spoke, like mamish, the ground that she spoke on, was the ground of the insurrection, right? And here she is, a black woman. Here she is, descended of slaves. And here she was, and where she was, people with Confederate flags were there. People with Confederate flags broke into the Capitol and put their Confederate flags in. How many people died so there would never be a Confederate flag there, and the Confederate flags were there, and a noose was there. So she had to confront that reality, which was 2 weeks and 1 day ago, and yet she has to be optimistic because there is no market for a pessimistic poet. So how do you acknowledge that and be optimistic? And in talking to Lisa, Dan, Michelle about it all week, we all kind of realized that it's always cosmic how this happens, but our Torah reading mirrors and maps life, because what also happens, the Israelites get out of Egypt this week. Slavery is over this week. And then there's kind of an insurrection. The Egyptians want to re-enslave them, and they come after them. And it's a very close call, and they're saved. So here's our move today. It's two things. One is we want to look at Amanda Gorman's her poem and her presence and her presentation. What was it about the Amanda Gorman moment that was so dramatically successful, and in this divided land of ours, drew pretty much universal rave reviews? I didn't hear anybody who said I didn't like Amanda Gorman. Maybe I'm not reading the full panoply of views, but everything that I read said, oh my God, Amanda Gorman. What was it about her presentation and her presence and her poetry that drew rave reviews? And I want to juxtapose that, after we're done with that, with the Shirah. Next week is Shabbat Shirah. And I want to just, for you who are following this at home, I want to frame it in the following way. This is a Sidur Sim Shalom, our daily prayer book. And if you ask yourself, what passages from the Torah, from the 5 books of Moses, are at such a level that we recite them as prayer every day. Most of us would say, oh, the Shema, the 3 paragraphs of the Shema, but also the following. It's kind of an insurrection inauguration moment. This is page 27 of our daily Siddur prayer book. Thus Adonai saved the people Israel from the Egyptians on that day. Israel saw the Egyptians lying dead on the shore of the sea. When the people Israel witnessed the great power that Adonai wielded against the Egyptians, the people feared Adonai, but they had trust in Adonai and in his servant Moses. So the Israelites are just saved, like the insurrection just fails. They just are saved. And then Az Yashir Moshe, then the Song of the Sea, the Shirah. So you have 2 cases, insurrection, inauguration, like, oh my God, it could have been so bad, and we're saved. And in the Shirah, oh my God, it could have been so bad, and we're saved. And I want to see what happens when we compare these 2 poems. So that's our root wrap for today. So I'm going to start with my colleagues, just at a general level. Why did Amanda Gorman rock it?
I would just start off by saying that, she's 22 or 23.
Yeah.
But her presentation was mature, and her presentation was there was nothing shy about it. She took she took the stage right away, and she took to the stage right away. So that was like initially, when she started to speak, and her gesticulations were just so not over dramatic, but just clearly in the presence of the moment, and in the presence of the presentation, and in the presence of the power of the poetry. So that I think took us all by storm right away.
Just the charisma.
Just the charisma.
The presence, the charisma.
The presence, absolutely. Yeah.
So I would add that one of the interesting lines she says in her poem is that she finds herself reciting for one. And the image, normally when you speak about poetry, you think about reading poetry. You think about speaking poetry. And her frame is reciting before someone, which harkens back to a more transcendent kind of a role. And if you read reports about how she wrote this and how it came to her, it's almost as if you get the sense that she's a vessel for these words coming out. And there are some beautiful reports of how she struggled herself, as Moses struggled, as Maya Angelou struggled with a speech impediment, as Biden struggles himself, and that the sense of these words being her raft through the world and being able to articulate in a way that is, in some ways, because of the strength that she showed overcoming these challenges, but also in some sense miraculous. I mean, there's a sense of awe in which she understands that she now has the power of speech. And I found that quite profound, the word reciting in here. Mm. And that harkens, by the way, to the Shirah. Right? There's so many rabbinic commentators who ask, like, wait a minute, how is Az Yashir Moshe all accept? But Uvenei Yisrael at the same time, all these words, all these same things, how did that happen? And I get a similar sense of sort of mystical, divine, putting forward of beautiful words that just spark into the world at the right time.
Thank you. Elisa, just a comment on how did she rock it? Why did she rock it? Why did everybody think she stole the show? And then we'll go deeper into her words.
I deeply agree with both of my colleagues. And I think I would add that one of the things that came for me, and this in some ways echoes both what Michelle and Dan shared, is that she walked the podium with the beacon of her shining bright. And it felt like she wasn't trying to be political. She wasn't trying to be something that she wasn't. She wasn't trying to mediate. She was just honestly sharing, and that's such a different move from what we think of as like politics, or like so many of us are trying to think about how we can fit into the mold of what we're supposed to be, or how we can be somebody that other people will like. And she just felt like she was, as you said, just breathing out, sharing without feeling like it had to be a poem. It was a sharing, and that was just so beautiful.
Okay, so I want to bring a rabbinic exegetical lens on her poetry because I think her poetry deserves it. And I want to start with the very title, which is so interesting. And I want to put a rabbinic magnifying glass on each of the 4 words. It's the hill we climb. The, which suggests that there's one, not multiple. Hill, not a mountain. It's not a mountain, it's a hill. A hill is a little bit less formidable than a mountain. The means one. So one not so formidable mountain, we climb. That verb. So how does the title convey the content of her poem?
For me, there are 2 answers to that. In the one sense, there is a more accessible MLK moment here. Of course, hill, mountaintop. You've got that resonance
Right.
there, and MLK was trying to convince us all that the mountaintop is something that we can get to, and that famously, every hill and molehill will ultimately reach us to that mountaintop.
So this is like an interstitial reference to MLK, but
which
instead
she
of
does
his
in the
I've
end
been
as
to
well.
the mountain, this is a hill,
This
more
is a-
accessible.
Right. I mean,
That's good. I like that. I like that. Okay.
And then the second piece, maybe you'll like this less.
That's really good.
I read a really interesting article about Amanda Gorman herself. And in some ways, it was really dry. It was about her growing up and going to a special school that she went to where they had a mixed socioeconomic kind of a community. And in another sense, she was explaining sort of how did she become who she is, somebody who loves poetry and is able to speak in this way. And one of the things that she shares there, which I found really powerful, was a sense that she has always understood America as broken. And therefore, right, and by the way, this is something that people politically, today, this is a big political problem. There are plenty of people who believe that we need to teach our children that America is not broken. And in a sense, actually, that this poem, at least as she frames it, emerges from her understanding as a Black woman that America has never been what it could be or should be, but that frame actually did not forge a depressive kind of a take on America, but instead that she found great strength in that take, because in the moment when she saw the Capitol building being stormed, that was just for her like well, of course it is. Of course it is, because that's part of who we are too. And therefore she wasn't shaken by this in the same way that, I certainly felt myself shaken by that moment. She at least reports that she was able to kind of take it in as part of who we are, but not part of who we have to be. And therefore she could move quickly to this moment.
Okay, so she, just to be fair and to double click on what you just said, what she writes in her poem is that a nation that isn't broken,
Correct.
but simply unfinished.
Right.
So, in other words, I think one of the cultural currents that she was entering was the 1619 Project or the 1776 Project, right? The 1619 Project says you cannot understand our country until you get slavery, which, by the way, they're right. And I didn't even get that until I read Caste. But the level to which slavery was not a sad, dark chapter, but like the fundamental basis on which our country was built, I never got that until I read Caste. And the 1619 Project makes that clear. And the counter is, of course, the 1776 Project, which is don't even talk about slavery, just talk about Thomas Jefferson, and don't talk about the slaves that he owned. Or the women that he had relations with that were his slaves. Just talk about his words. And what she says is it's a nation that isn't broken but simply unfinished. And do you think that formulation, isn't broken, does justice to the insurrection?
So I actually found that's why I found this article so fascinating, because I've always assumed that being steeped in a sense of a way of interrogating your history that is critical would yield people who are critical and cynical and who don't believe in in the values that we share, right? There is that voice that's really worried about that. You have to tell the tales of glory, and if we don't tell the tales of glory as tales of glory, we somehow make their power less. And in, at least in her own reflection, you see that it's actually because she understood that this world, that this country has always contained this problematic nature, that she could say it's unfinished, right? That she could understand, okay, all right, this is part of who we are. And by the way, meet this moment, because we have to confront this. We do have to confront this problem in our nation, but we also can't be stopped by it. And she somehow had a superpower because she had grown up in that water of understanding our world from a critical perspective that enabled her then to find the crack in that and continue to build towards wholeness and hope. I found it beautiful.
Let's talk about, I'd love to shine the light on the word climb. And I think this builds on your sense of your interpretation of her, which is when you climb, you're never really at rest. When you're climbing, if you think about a hike, you're climbing, you're hiking, you're climbing, you're not at a plateau. Like if you're climbing, it's hard to have lunch. If you're climbing and you're on an ascent, it's hard to have lunch. Like you can stop, you can put your bag down, you can take a sip of water, you can breathe, you can blow your nose, you can maybe have a granola bar, but you can't really sit and have lunch. You can't like chill and take a little nap. If you're climbing, you're breathing heavy. If you're climbing, you're breathing hard. And if you're climbing, you know that you haven't reached your destination. And it feels like one of the resonances of climb to me is that we never plateau. We never breathe. We never get there. It's kind of Moses. It's kind of the children of Israel. We never actually cross the River Jordan and enter the Promised Land. We're climbing, whether it's a hill or a mountain, but that means we're always breathing hard, and we always got to get somewhere higher. What else? What other resonances did you guys pick up from the title and from the poem?
Well, I would just say, to pick up on what you just said, it's the word hill makes it really interesting, because climbing a mountain, if someone says, let's go climb a mountain, I mean, it's like, okay. But climbing a hill is very different, because it means that it may be hard work, but we can get there. Whereas climbing a mountain may feel like, I don't know that I can get to the top of this mountain. So maybe that's part of it also. And of course you're right about actively, that it is active, and that there isn't it isn't a moment of rest. But on the other hand, it is doable. It's reachable. It's an attainable goal, and it's the hill we climb. So we're doing it together. And doing together means it's doable together, and maybe only together. I'm not really sure if it's only or not, but we can do it together.
It's interesting for me because we're both from Colorado, and they're the Colorado foothills, and they are not small. Like there's a range of hills. There's like the bunny hill you go skiing on. That's small, but still not that small. The Colorado foothills, it's not. So it's an interesting frame, because within a hill, you have all different ranges of challenge. And I think, Wes, I was listening to you talk about, not being able to rest. At the same time, when you're climbing, one of the things I find so interesting is when you go on a hike, your legs are inclined at a different angle than they normally are, which means you're engaging different muscles than you often engage. And I find that often after I've finished, I feel my places in my muscles that I don't normally feel. And it's like, I didn't notice it when I was climbing. But that muscle development happens as a part of the process. And I think part of it is one of the things I felt really resonant within this poem is we're all doing this work, whether we acknowledge it or not. There's a way in which we're all, however you are on this project, and whether you're an adherent of the 1776 project or the 1619 project, we're all doing this work, and we're all building these muscles somehow together. And it's sometimes only after you've finished the climb that you can figure out where you built those muscles.
All right. I wanted to, before we pivot to the Shirah, I am just dying to ask you guys one thing, because this just struck me, and tell me if it struck you this way. She writes, this is in the third paragraph from the bottom of the page, "For while we have our eyes on the future, history has its eyes on us." And that just felt like such a clear reference to Hamilton and Lin-Manuel Miranda, just such an interstitial, allusion, right? This is like when parts of the Bible are playing with each other and gesturing towards each other. Where he has George Washington singing, "History has its eyes on you." And here she says, "History has its eyes on us." So what's the resonance and the meaning of the gesture towards Lin-Manuel Miranda and Hamilton? And what's the resonance of the change from "History has its eyes on you" to "History has its eyes on us"?
So I loved, she tweeted Lin-Manuel Miranda and said, "Hey, shout out." Did you catch the references? And there's a whole cultural phenomenon called sampling, right, in which you're able to pull on the authority of a source before you and really bring in its power. And of course, any poet who refers to poetry of the past, or in this case, music of the past, which is also poetry, actually has the ability of borrowing the power of that piece too, because your mind ultimately goes to it. This is one of the things I love about the rabbis and the Talmud, because they'll say one thing about Torah and you're like, the whole story clicks into place for you. It's totally intertextual. And so what I would say is then you could ask the question of, okay, so what was the cultural moment that was Hamilton, right? What was that about for us? And I we don't have enough time in this class to go deeply into that question, but for me, I would say that one piece of that, and it's only one piece, is that the idea that we can actually reclaim a sense of pride and of hope at the same time without having to accept the putting our history on a pedestal. Meaning we can interrogate our history, we can understand our history as it was, unvarnished, and yet we can still walk out singing in glory that history has its eyes on. I mean, you're meant to take away from Hamilton that history has its eyes on us, not just them, us. And she's walking out of the room singing that loud.
Okay, I want to pivot for a second now to the Shirah, Az Yashir Moshe. And again, the context is, it's the Israelites have just been through a terrifying moment when they're ex-slaves, they have no history of fighting back. The Egyptian army and all of its ferocity is about to get them. There's nowhere to go other than they drown in the sea, and God does this miracle. And then the Israelites saw the Egyptians lying dead on the shore of the sea, and only then, after the 10 plagues and after this terrifying coda, are they free, and then they sing. So here's my question to you guys. What is it about, there's a lot of fabulous passages in the Torah. A lot of fabulous passages in the Torah. Why is it that our liturgy, our prayer book, other than the Shema, really only sees fit to put this, near miss moment? They saw the Israelites dead the Egyptians dead on the seashore, Az Yashir. That's what we summon every day, 365 days a year. What is it about that moment? What is it about the message? What's the message of the Shirah that is just so important we have to say it every day?
It's interesting for me. When I was building my davening practice, I hated this Shirah, and I just I still
say more. That's
full disclosure. When I daven b'yachid, I skip it every single day. I know I recognize this is I just want to come clean and share that I have this. It's a challenging, lovely. But so I talked with my Rebbe about it, and because at the time I was I want to build this davening practice, and I recognize it's not just mentioned once or twice. It's throughout the liturgy. You can't really get away from it. And even if you skip the actual Shirah, there's still all the references to the dead babies that are happening in Egypt. Before you can even get to your Amidah, and you can't I don't skip two things. I do mention that part, but
the dead babies over the poetry.
I do. I choose. People are weird. That's just who we are. But my Rebbe talked about needing to be at a high enough spiritual level to be in this song, and that there are days and there are days when you can say it, and there are days when you don't say it. And I think for me, there's a really interesting moment. We talked a little bit this week about like when does the song come? Because I don't buy like all the questions around like it's the miracle and they all just magically sang it together. I just think there's like no way. Like songs, that's not how communal singing works. If that was how that worked, we could sing so many different melodies all together. We would just automatically get them in our sanctuary. We could just like, we could pick new melodies every week. That's not how music works.
Can I ask a question? I want to know something. What is it? I didn't get it yet. What is it about the Shirah that doesn't work for you that makes you want to skip it? In other words, you talked about you do skip it and you had to talk to your Rebbe about it, but what's your problem with the Shirah?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that within the Shirah, it's like a very interesting blend of the most gorgeous language you'll ever encounter and the most horrible imagery. And it's all blended together, and it doesn't feel like prayer to me. If that and I don't even know quite how to describe it, but all of the other morning liturgy, my morning practice is I go through and I sing it to myself, and that just doesn't feel like a song to me. I sing all the way up until it and then all the way after it, but not that song.
That's
Can I just want to jump in a little bit. So, this is the Shirah is a moment about God's power and about people coming together, but it is also about violence and destruction. And I could see how that could be, complex for people trying to find a prayer moment. I can certainly get that. And it's interesting when you first proposed this particular poem, I was thinking maybe Ha'azinu may have been another poem we could have chosen because that's a little less, violence about God's power.
Yeah.
But
Ha'azinu gets no press in the
Right, I
Jewish
understand
tradition.
that.
You
Exactly.
read it
Yeah.
once
It
a
doesn't-
year,
it
and
doesn't,
Ha'azinu.
yes, yeah,
But this
yeah.
is every day.
This is every day. And
This is every day.
Yeah, so the question is, I think it poses the question that the framers of the Siddur had, which is, does redemption need some kind of powerful, almost violent a moment or not? And I think that the poem that we just read earlier is saying that it's exactly the opposite. And exactly the opposite. Like, for instance, in the first paragraph, she said, we've learned that quiet isn't always peace. But the idea that quiet and peace and reflection is a way towards redemption that perhaps violent actions are not. So this is a contrast between some of maybe the ways that each of the poems gives us a look into who we are as humans in our relationship with God and with our people and the Jewish people and with other people and how we come together and how we find that hill to climb.
Look, our tradition very much gets the problematic nature of this prayer. In fact, we have the Midrash that speaks about the angels starting to join the Israelites in this beautiful song, and that God's like, no, stop.
Go back to timeout.
Right? You're in a timeout, right? The Egyptians are also my people, and they're drowning. And you don't get to sing about that. The Israelites get to sing about that because they've just experienced this moment, and it's natural and it's normal for a human being to rejoice in the destruction of another when it becomes their redemption. It's not okay in general. And in fact, I mean, when we look back on that moment in history, we actually mark that at our Pesach Seders. Are you very much into the dipping?
Love the dipping. The question is like, which finger, and also, do you keep it on a plate that you're going to eat from?
So you're going to magnify that.
We can go deep on that.
Okay, so we'll get to Pesach soon, but it was fascinating to me to hear that you don't even say this song, because to me, it's actually one of the core places in our liturgy where we first learn about the space and the place of women in our tradition. And like the power that we don't sing, we can't sing unless all of us are singing. and that there is this sense that you get wrapped up in a redemptive moment that is not complete until everyone gets there. And to me, that's just an incredible power about this piece. And then from the other perspective, though, I'll say I don't know that I got this either until sort of a middle of the night hospital moment where I felt like, you know, in this redemptive space, having felt a sense of having been redeemed, to be able to truly own these words and the power of this poetry and what it really meant. And so perhaps we say this prayer every day because that redemption isn't just about the destruction of Pharaoh's army, but it's about all the forces that align against us and the ways in which we come through.
Yeah. I want to pause and deepen the point that you just made, Michelle. I was listening to, and in the following way, I was listening to Evan Osnos, who wrote a biography of Joe Biden, interviewed on the New Yorker Hour. And the NPR or New Yorker reporter asked him, what was the salient and surprising takeaway of Joe Biden's inauguration? And Evan Osnos said it was the theme of fragility, that democracy is precious, but it's fragile. It could be taken away from us. That life itself is precious, but it's fragile. It could be taken away from us. And of course, everybody knows about his biography, about the loved ones, most recently Bo, precious but fragile, taken away from us. Democracy, precious, fragile, taken away from us. And that note of fragility was the driving theme of his words. And I think that, to me, as I read the Shirah, it's fragility. That is to say that life itself is, I mean, in other words, you don't say the Shirah. I always remember this article about Bruce Springsteen, that he was most prolific and fecund and rich when he was, a poor boy in New Jersey, writing about the gritty streets. And then he had a period where he moved to Beverly Hills, and his songs just didn't have that resonance. It's hard to sing gritty Bruce Springsteen when you're in a gated community in Beverly Hills. And in a similar way, it feels like the energy of the Shirah comes from the fragility. The energy of the Shirah comes from the fact that, oh my God, we almost, it could have been so different. Like the sense of sharp danger and sharp relief that we kind of just made it. Oh my God. You can't do that when you're in Beverly Hills behind a gated community and everything is safe. And so I think that gratitude and fragility are very interwoven. And to me, that feels like the message of the Shirah. We are so vulnerable. We are so fragile. Never forget our democracy can be taken away. Never forget our life can be taken away. Never forget our health can be taken away. Never forget our money can be taken away. Never forget that what we love most can be taken away. That's the theme of the Shirah. And if you live like that, then you live vigilant and you live grateful.
I think there's also something for me that, and this is a place of tension between organized religious practice and spontaneous davening, right? Which is that sometimes the things that we practice lose their emotional vibrancy. Like you can have an amazing, unreal, joyful, or tragic experience, but when you repeat it over and over again, those emotions dull. And so there's a really interesting place in our tradition that says, I'm going to take this pivotal moment with so much emotion and so much intensity and so much drama, and I'm going to turn it into a daily recitation.
Boilerplate.
Yeah. And that it neuters it in some ways. And the question becomes, for me, like, how do we as practitioners and inheritors of a tradition that's all about continuity, that's all about repetition, that's all about building practice? And right, I deeply believe, I daven every day, I deeply believe in repetition, I deeply believe there's power to doing the same thing and feeling it and bringing it into the moment. But then how do we also bring in that spontaneity and that honest emotional practice and not just lose ourselves in the words?
Right, the Kevin Kavanagh issue, right?
Yeah.
But I was also thinking, like, in terms of this poem. So the other thing is that Amanda does make I think a reference in a certain way to Shirat Hayam, and that's in the fourth paragraph. towards the end where she says, this could be like, we could be thinking about how the Israelite people may have felt, how we felt. Even as we hurt, we hoped, that even as we tired, we tried, that we'll forever be tied together, victorious, not because we will never again know defeat, but because we will never again sow division. So I think, and this is the moment of Az Yashir Moshe that we all sang together,
Right.
and that not knowing division, that when we come together, that will bring the power.
Right.
But that also that the 400 years of slavery that we hurt, but yet we still hoped.
It's
Right.
interesting, Dan, because you're pulling out here the one line that sprang so true and then so false to me at the same time. There's just, if I have only one criticism of this poem, it is an extraordinary poem, and it's deep, and it displays so much understanding about the human condition and about the fragility of our democracy, and it speaks so prophetically to our moment.
But how
so
could she possibly
helpfully.
say we will never again sow
Right.
division?
Right,
when
like
there's an
we literally have division right now,
In the minute.
as she's standing
So
there.
can you just-
As she's
right.
standing there, we have, congressmen who say, I'm not going to go, I'm not going
Right.
to be part because I'm scared of other congressmen. You have people who are in that moment sort of waiting
So
to, yeah, okay. I
So
don't have
she
to-
surely no, but she, but
just-
she
it's
surely
literally
got-
in that moment.
So when she writes, "We will never again sow division,"
Right.
just when she knows the impeachment trial is coming, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et
Right.
cetera, what could she possibly have meant by that?
So I'm struggling with that, right? Because it is such a polished poem, and that is literally the one place
It's a
that
kavanah.
rings.
It's a kavanah. It's a
painful.
hope.
But the rest of it, so that's the thing. It's so out of line with the rest of it. The rest of it is so helpful and real in its realism, right? It's helpful in not becoming overwrought about what is possible. Even the first part of the sentence that you read, even as we grieved, we grew. It acknowledges that we hold both of these things at the same time, and then suddenly, I don't know, she needed an editor.
So,
Well, no, I think
okay.
there's a place for saying that in this moment we're never going to sow division. I totally hear that. In some ways, the impeachment feels like a moment of division. It may be that there's a way to see that as a moment of grappling with what has been, not about sowing division, but about finding a shared ground moving forward. I think, and we have this conversation all the time because I like broad, hyperbolic language that takes in the fullness of what could be and not the reality of what is. I'm really drawn to that. So I actually was like, yeah, I was so with her when she was saying this, not because it in any way strikes me as being purely factual or absolutely realistic, but because that really works for me. And I was like, yes, we're never going to do that ever again.
And there's a place for aspirational
Yeah.
language. It just felt out of place here within the rest of her poem because she was not using that device throughout the rest of it. But back to the Shira.
Never going to get
with you. No, I have this poem that Amanda Gorman writes, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it, as her final lines. I mean, it really speaks to the possibility of what each of us can do to be part of this project that is our democracy. And so I would want to ask you, Aliza, the question, do you get something, if you look at the Shira, is there a shared project that emerges for you there, or does it just end with it's a singing on that particular day for that particular time about a destruction of a particular people?
No, so it's interesting. I think it's a gorgeous shira. I deeply love it, and when I do textual art, often I find myself drawing out the words from particular places from the shira. And in our home, we have different artwork from the shira. I don't like it in that context, right? It's not off my plate, and there have been times in my life where it was a Shabbos practice only, and it's not typically our main sanctuary Shabbos practice here, but I'm not opposed to it. I just don't find it it's not the song of my heart every morning.
But I'm so interested by how much you like the language that is not necessarily real, but that's hyperbolic, that could get you to a place, and yet that the dulling of our prayer throughout time can also be seen as an insertion of a moment, a small moment within a day in which we're meant to try to touch or reach some hyperbolic moment in our past.
So I wanted to end with two related questions, which is, what's the message of Amanda Gorman's poem to you and the message of the Shirat to you in this season of 2021? And do they reinforce each other, or are they in creative tension with each other? What do you have two poems that are written between the insurrection and the inauguration, between, oh my God, we're almost killed by the Egyptians, and now we're not, we're here. What's the message of each poem, and do they reinforce each other or leave you with some creative contradiction? And what do you take away when you look at these two poems of salvation that are both hyper aware of our fragility?
So I think there's an interesting contradiction, at least if we take our text seriously, which is that, one, we have Amanda Gorman, which is a song of a young woman on her own, and she's not seeking consensus, she's not trying to make everybody sing with her, she is sharing her individual song. And we have the Song of the Sea, which is everyone all together. It's a collective, collaborative project. And I feel like as I'm hearing both of these songs today, I'm really feeling the task of each one of us to both sing our own individual song and figure out a way to all sing together, to be an Amanda Gorman, and also to be like, okay, no, I'm gonna go into the world, and it's gonna be like this magical moment where all of us just burst into the same song and have the same shared vision, and we're able to move forward together.
Dan?
Yeah, I think actually she does really kind of sum it up, and it is in the 5th paragraph, which I think also connects the two poems. She's talking about scripture in that paragraph. But she says, that is the promise to glade the hill we climb, if only we dare it, because being American is more than a pride we inherit. It's the past we step into and how we repair it. I think that's really, it's our message. It's our message, as Jews, we have a history that we step into, and our purpose is tikkun olam, to be preparing the world. So that tikkun olam partly has to do with the vision that we have of who of reality, it's the connection of what reality is and the vision of what reality can be and should be. And I think that really connects. The Shirat Hayam is about what reality is, and the vision of moving forward after the Exodus, after the crossing of the sea. What's our vision? The vision is Tikkun Olam. And then she says that the scripture says we should sit under our own vine and fig tree, and no one shall make us afraid. That's the vision that we have as Jews, and that's the vision that we have as Americans simultaneously.
Michelle?
So I love that this has immediately become something that we study. I don't know if you guys can see, but I have a highlighter throughout all of this, and I'm pointing out which parts are intertextual, and I believe that this will be studied into our future, and I love that particularly because to me it speaks not to the pieces that we've been talking about all morning about the ways in which they're similar or different, these poems, but because of the beginning. Ashir ladonai ki ga'o ga'a. I will praise, I will sing to God, for God, and the root of the word ga'o is lifted up or exalted. And I think the power of a person or a people being able to flow with exalting is just something we need to have more of, and I'd love to see more of this kind of spirit in our world.
Thank you, guys. So I'll tell you what the common denominator of both of these for me, and it's always where I live, and it's especially where I live now, is how tenuous life is. how we're just barely hanging on. I always feel like everything's just barely hanging on, like very, very, very fragile. I mean, I think about our congregation. It's very, very fragile, very fragile. I mean, we haven't been in the same building for a year, right? We're riven by politics the way our nation is riven by politics. We're riven, we're not present, we're all on our own screens. Instead of being under our own fig tree and none shall be afraid, we're all on our own couches with our own screens with the doors closed. And the country's barely hanging on. 400,000 dead, barely hanging on. The vaccine rollout, so hard. How do you do this? Barely hanging on. Israel is they're doing well on the vaccinations, but it's a lockdown, barely hanging on, right? And that fragility, that what we love most is so tenuous, right? And at the same time, hope that we can and we will get through this. Right, that we're not going to surrender to the fragility. We are going to transcend the fragility. Our congregation has these problems that we've not been in the same building, and we're riven like our beloved nation, but we're going to transcend this, right? And so for me, the one line that I have just always loved is B'toch hayam bayabasha, that the Israelites go into the sea where they're wet and they can't breathe, but somehow bayabasha on dry ground. And that notion that you could be submerged, immersed, vulnerable, overwhelmed. B'toch hayam, you're in the middle of the sea, but you're bayabasha on dry ground, and you're going to be okay. But it's a tight one. It's a close one. In the poem, it's a close call. In the Shirah, it's a very close call. In our country, it's a very close call. In life, it's a very close call. But the whole religious project is that in the end, we will sing a song of gratitude.
Amen.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Can't wait for us to sing again. Yom Huledet Sameach, Elias.
Oh, happy birthday, Elias. Safe travels to Argentina.